Is this thing on? It says it's on. Okay. Good morning. Is that how we start this? I don't remember how we start this. Anyway. Good morning. I'm Jason. This is my garage, and it has been way too long since I've done an update video on either of our Miatas, really. So I think the last time I recorded something was about 3 months ago. And a lot has happened in those 3 months. I haven't recorded any of it, but we'll give you the rundown. We ended up, I think what got me out of my routine of little projects around the garage, we ended up spending about 3 weeks down in our condo in Florida. You know, with COVID and everything going on, we decided to go down there and just work remotely for a few weeks and enjoy the beach and sunshine. And that got us out of the house. And once school started, you know, we came back to Ohio, got back into our routine here. And I've been picking at some little projects since then, but I really haven't done a whole lot to either of the Miatas. We took the RF down to Miatas at the Gap in the middle of August, right before we went to Florida, the week before we went to Florida. I had a blast down there. Car did great. Supercharger performed just as well as I could have hoped on, I think it was a 1,200 mile weekend that we put on it. So that was great to see. You know, the RF with the supercharger has been fantastic all summer long. The NA Miata we picked up in July. I've done a few things to it. You know, fix the exhaust, fix the clutch, change some fluids, clean it out really good. And since we did all that, the wife's been driving it for the last couple of months. This was bought so that she could get comfortable driving a manual, a stick. And she's done that. She's now taking over the RF, driving that pretty regularly when the weather's decent. So now that the weather is cooling off in Ohio, I'm getting ready to dive into some of the bigger projects on this thing, you know, where I can have it tore apart for a longer period of time and not have the wife bitching at me that she can't drive it. So that brings me to today's project. While she's been driving it, I've been tracking down a coolant leak. And I thought this was going to be just the typical water pump issue that all these NA Miatas have. As I got into it, I don't think that's the case. So today I'm going to be replacing the water pump inlet. What I think is going on, and I'll show you once I pull the intake out. I'll get a light down in there. I'll show you exactly where I think it's leaking. But there's this 90-degree elbow, and previous owner has just completely coated this in RTV, trying to plug some kind of a leak, and I can watch it. It's either from the hose here, either this is all corroded, it's not sealing, or there's a crack in here, and it's just a steady drip right out of this, and it'll go through the overflow bottle every few weeks. I've got to top that off. We haven't run out of coolant with it yet. I mean, obviously we're not driving it very far. She's just been cruising around in town with it. So that's been great. So the annoying part in all of this is I went ahead and bought a water pump and timing belt kit, because I just assumed, you know, with this being an older car that sat so long and where I could see coolant leaking from, I assumed it was a water pump. And if you're going to do the water pump, you might as well do the timing belt. And if you're going to do the timing belt, you might as well do front seals. So I started to dive into that, and that's when I realized it's not leaking from the water pump. It's actually leaking from right here, which is a completely different project, a lot simpler project, fortunately. So I picked up a used water inlet neck off of eBay for, this was 35 bucks, and came with the other heater core tube to run back to the firewall. And I just spent the morning, I probably spent way too much time with a wire wheel on this, getting it all cleaned up and polished up and looking nice and pretty to go into a car, into a spot where you will never see it again. So long story short, that's what I'm getting ready to do this morning, and we'll see what happens, as usual. So I really haven't done a whole lot to this thing since my last video. I've done a couple things. The biggest was I installed a shifter rebuild kit on the shifter. The rubber boots were completely disintegrated, and you know, I don't know how long. I can only assume that the transmission fluid was original. This thing's got 88,000 miles on it. Who knows if they ever changed it? So put a shifter rebuild kit on the shifter, and I did a transmission fluid flush. Nothing big. There's a million videos of all of that on YouTube. So I didn't bother recording any of that. But that's where it's at. The car is running and driving really well. It's stock brakes, it's original suspension. So all of that is worn out, and that's going to be some of the things I tackle this winter, along with a new top, new seats, and then we'll start jumping into the suspension and really getting this to where it's a good driving, comfortable, good driving car that the wife can have fun with. So for the purpose of this video, I'm going to dive into removing the intake and getting the coolant neck out, which is going to mean removing the under tray and draining a little bit of the coolant. I'm not going to do a full flush. I don't think it needs it. I'm sure it wouldn't hurt. But again, for the purposes of what we're doing with this motor, I'm not going to bother with that right now. The motor is running fantastic. We're never going to road trip it the way it sits. It'll be an around town car with this motor. That'll come, road trips and that kind of thing will come once we've done the LS swap here in a couple of years. So that's where we're at. I'm going to jump into it. All right, so got the AC compressor and intake out of the way. That gives me a lot more clearance to show you. So here's the water inlet pipe right here, right? And there's two bolts, one here and one on the bottom. And then there's an O-ring in here, and this pipe runs back here and connects to the heater core hose right here. So I got to undo this. This is the lower radiator hose. Obviously I got to pull that clamp off, disconnect the bolts. That should pop right out, and I can put the new one in with some new gaskets and a new O-ring, and hopefully that takes care of our leak. And that's all it is. So we'll see. All right, I got the old water inlet neck out, and I don't know who the previous owner of this thing was, but I think they should know that more RTV is not the answer. I mean, my gosh, look at this thing. There's crap everywhere. All of that just caked on there. I don't know how water was even flowing through this thing. There was so much there. There's remnants of a gasket still on it, plus more RTV around it. This is a tube that hooks up to the heater core on the firewall. There's supposed to be an O-ring in here. There's an O-ring of RTV, I suppose. But, I mean, it's no wonder this thing was leaking. This is crazy. So, I'm glad I've got a nice shiny one here to put in. And I've got brand new gaskets. So, there's an O-ring goes in there. And then, you know, obviously the gasket goes on. Obviously the gasket goes on the neck there. So I'm going to go ahead and get this all cleaned up. The car itself is a mess, as you would expect. I mean, this thing's been leaking oil for who knows how long, which I do have fixed. You know, previous video, I put a new valve cover gasket and cam angle sensor O-ring on the motor, and that completely solved the oil leak. This thing doesn't drop of oil anymore. So now I've just got the mess on the motor here to clean up. So now that I've got some access, I can get in here and do a little cleaning and make this look a little nicer. I did, while I've got this apart, I did go ahead and pull the heat shield off. And I've got that painted up over here. I just hit this with some VHT aluminum spray paint and primer. Got that primed and painted a week ago. So as I get this thing put back together, we can put the painted heat shield back on, and that'll start cleaning up the engine bay a little bit in this thing. So that'll be nice. And all right, so I'm going to get cleaning this up, and we'll get the new parts put back in, and hopefully this solves our coolant leak. All right, let's see if we can show this, because this was the biggest pain in the butt of the whole thing. If you can see the mating surface down there without blinding the camera. My light position here. Yeah, can you see that? Holy crap. That was caked in RTV. It had an old paper gasket welded to it. I could not... this was probably an hour of scrubbing and scraping and cleaning and spraying and to get it as clean as I possibly can. So I think now, you know, I'm at a point where I can install the new one. So I'm sure someone will point out to me what I did wrong, but here's a new one. I put a thin layer of RTV with the gasket on both mating surfaces. So that should, once it's installed back in the car, that should mate up nice. So all that's left is to install my new O-ring. Got to put a new O-ring on the end of this tube. That goes right there. And I don't believe you need any RTV on this. I might put a little bit out here, but that's going to be about it. That should not need any RTV to seal. And then this is the hose that goes on the end of that nipple. It's in a little worse shape than I thought. I may try and get a new one. We'll see. The ends are a little boogered up. So that's where I'm at. Alright, so there is the new water inlet neck installed. Got everything hooked back up. Everything's nice and tight. Got the lower radiator hose connected. Used the spring clamp that someone had left on the pipe. I took off the screw-on clamp that someone had used. Put the factory clamp back. I put the old hose back on. We'll see if this is leaking or not. I don't know. I have a feeling my issue was with the nipple here coming out of the neck. I think that was cracked, and someone tried fixing it by coating it in RTV, which obviously didn't hold up. So that should do it. Now all I got to do is put everything back together and fill this thing with coolant again. Shouldn't be completely empty. There should still be quite a bit in the radiator, but I got to get air out of the lines now and get it burped, and hopefully that is the end of the coolant issue on this thing. So I'm gonna get this button back up, and then we can wrap up this video. Okay, so I'm getting everything buttoned back up. All right, got the compressor back in place, belts in place, and I hooked up my funnel here to start dumping some coolant back in the radiator. And now I've got one more leak. You see all them bubbles? So I gotta figure out where that's coming from. I think it's coming from here, because it sure looks like it's bubbling up. So I'm gonna pull that hose off and see if I can't find a crack or something, and go from there. Okay, so here's what we've got. Let me get a light situated here so I can point. I don't know if you can see this, but there is a hole, a perfect little hole right there in this nipple. And that is what's dripping now. So I pulled the bottom hose back, this one. So that's why this is dripping, because it's just kind of sitting there right now. So I'm trying to debate on what I can do, because I can slip the hose all the way up and completely cover that. And if I can get a clamp on it, that may be enough. And then this one can come up. I can't do it one-handed, but I think you get my idea. If I can get both hoses up and then clamp, that might be all right. If it continues to leak, then I've got to replace the water pump outlet neck, which is a little bit bigger of a job. Still not terrible. I don't have to take the timing belt off. Yeah, not terrible. The thermostat housing, that's what that is, not an outlet. The thermostat housing. So I'd have to get a new one of those if this continues dripping. But it's definitely not as bad as it was. So I'm going to see what I can do with this and get this filled back up and get it running and driving again. And we'll see how it behaves at temperature. Maybe it won't be too bad, because I really, this is the kind of stuff that I want it to be right. I don't want it leaking. I want it running well, but I don't want to replace anything more than I have to, since this motor basically needs to last me about 2 years, and then the whole thing can come out. So I know my radiator is on its last legs, but it's not leaking. I don't know the status of the water pump and timing belt, but they're working, and as far as I can tell, neither one is leaking. So if I can just fix these little things and fix the leaks, make it reliable for around town, that's good enough for now. So that's where I'm at. Well, this is just getting fun. So I went ahead and repositioned these hoses and got better coverage over that little hole with this hose. Clamped it up, which meant dropping this down. Got that clamp back up, and went ahead and started continuing adding coolant. And I'm flexing, the upper radiator hose and the lower radiator hose, and listening for bubbles, and everything's gurgling like I would expect it to, and all's fine. And then all of a sudden, my hand on the bottom radiator hose here gets wet. So now I've got a cracked upper radiator hose. I've got questionable hoses here. I've got a hole in a nipple. And let's face it, the lower radiator hose has seen better days. So I think that's going to do it for this video. Next up, I'm going to be replacing the radiator hoses and the thermostat housing on my 95 Miata. So yeah, good times. Old cars are fun, right? This is what we get into. So if you've made it this far, I really appreciate it. I will strive to do better in regular updates here in the near future. Now that winter is, well, not winter. I don't want to say winter. I'm not ready for winter. Fall is here. I do have to say that because fall is here. And I don't know what my point was with that. I think my point was I will strive to do better with the regular updates, and with the change in the weather, that should allow me to get out here and stay a little more active on the car projects. And obviously we got more to do on the NA Miata here. So thank you much for tuning in, and I will see you next time. Thanks.